everybody, and welcome to another session at the Reactors. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, and please be kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Today is the first episode of Cloud Gaming Leveled Up series, and we are so excited to be able to live stream it from the Reactors in London. In today's episode, we will be talking about cloud native games, and with that, I will now hand over to Steph and George, who will introduce the session.
Awesome. Thank you, Rav. As Rav mentioned, I'm Steph Rogers, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm a young female wearing a white gaming t-shirt with black trousers. I'm the Game Developer Relationships Lead for Azure Gaming in the UK, and we're so excited to kick off this first series as many events will be coming to you eventually. So keep an eye on this space for more news about where we'll be across the UK. In this first episode, we're going to be learning about the future of cloud native games and development from cloud game development experts who have a combined, experience of years, I think like 85 plus, which is pretty impressive. And so we are excited to partner with Yuki as well for our events, which leads me to introduce your moderator for later today when we host the panel. And this is George.
Thank you very much, Steph. And of course, I have 80 years of that 85-year experience. But really, we're going to be joined by some fantastic experts who really know their stuff on this, who we're going to be talking about this whole topic with. So it's going to be a great opportunity to learn about a lot of the practical side of things as well, and some of the cool community elements as well. But I think you've probably heard enough from us. I think it's time that we go and hand over to our first speaker of the day, right?
Nice.
Fantastic.
And here he is right now. Everyone, welcome Harvey.
Fantastic. Hi.
Well, thank you, Steph and George. My name is Harvey Eagle. I work for Microsoft, and my role at Microsoft is as the Director of Azure for Game Developers. I am a white male. I'm wearing a grey hoodie with grey jeans, and my pronouns are he and him. Now, over the course of the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to walk through some of the considerations that you need to keep in mind when you think about game development in the cloud. Now, I think one of the things we all know with game development is that change is a certainty. And as you go through your development cycle, many things will change along the way. And when things are changing, it's really important that you are able to adapt to those changes. And so the first question you need to ask yourself is, do the current development tools and services that you are using today allow you to adapt to changes when they are required? Are there things that cloud could help you with that maybe you haven't considered doing before? Or are you in fact a little bit constrained by maybe some old processes or infrastructure, or maybe established ways of thinking and working? To help answer this question, it's useful to have a look at the various stages of cloud native development. Now, if you're used to developing games in the traditional way, the chances are that most of your development tools live on-premise. And by on-premise, we mean that you have a PC under your desk in the office, maybe you have a server rack in your office, or perhaps it's co-located somewhere at a cloud provider. The key is you manage everything in your stack. You are responsible for the power consumption, you're responsible for the networking, for the hardware, and if anything breaks, it's up to you to repair it. If, for example, you need more disk space in your server rack, you're going to need to go to procurement, you need to request new hardware, you need to wait several weeks for that hardware to arrive. You then need to wait for IT to provision that new disk space for you. You get the idea. Now, the first cloud service model is something called infrastructure as a service. And if you choose infrastructure as a service, then effectively you are giving away responsibility or abstracting the responsibility to a cloud provider. And you see that in blue. And to the right of the slide are examples of some companies who offer infrastructure as a service. Now, if you choose infrastructure as a service, some of the reasons you would be because you're just not interested in running or operating your own hardware. You're really only interested in managing the operating system and then running things on that operating system like middleware, data, applications. The higher up the stack you go, which is in blue on the slide, then the more flexibility you are giving away. When you're on premise, for example, you get to decide everything. You get to decide the CPU, you choose what SSD you require, you get to choose in every instance. The more managed you are, the less responsibility you have, the less flexibility you have. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. In the next cloud service model, it's called platform as a service. And here, you're giving away even more responsibility because you no longer own the operating system. You no longer have to manage updates to that operating system, and you have no middleware management because you've abstracted responsibility for all of that to a cloud provider. And all you really have to do is deploy apps and manage your data. And the last cloud service model is something called software as a service. And here, responsibility for all the abstraction layers goes to a cloud provider. And all you really need to do is provide data to the application, which is then fully managed by the cloud provider. What's really important when you're choosing which cloud service model is right for you is always start with what you're trying to achieve versus the tech stack that you inherit. Because the tech stack that you choose should be based on what it is you're trying to achieve, and that may be different to the current IT environment that you have. So what does all this mean for you as a game developer? The key is, don't think, I cannot do cloud because. Explore what is possible. Start with what it is you want to achieve, because that is going to lead you to a set of requirements. And once you have a set of requirements, you then have to decide whether to buy or build the solutions that will help you answer and meet those requirements. Once you have that, you then have your architecture, and your architecture decisions influence your infrastructure. And that's not something that is always considered when you think about cloud native development. And the higher up the stack you go, the more that is true. Think of this as a three-legged stool. What's important to understand is that your architecture will influence your infrastructure. And in some cases, your infrastructure is also going to influence your architecture. And I want to share with you an example in the on-premise world about how infrastructure influences your architecture. In this case, let's imagine that you have a server on-premise. It's a server that you use because it's familiar to you. You've used it before, and it roughly behaves in the way that you expect it to behave. But because you're using that server, you are already constraining your thinking about how to achieve what you want, because you're starting with an assumption that that server must be used. It must be used because your company has bought that server. You have a 3-year commitment to use that server. And so that server is influencing your architecture and your software design. Now, in the cloud world, you're less constrained by your CapEx investments, and you're able to think more tangentially about how best to solve for your requirements. Now, it's often underestimated in the cloud that every requirement and every architecture decision influences your infrastructure. And in turn, therefore, the infrastructure that you choose to deploy is going to determine the cost that you have and the scale that you can achieve. Now, all of us want to avoid cost surprises. And it's important to say that in the cloud, you pay for what you use. And I want to share an example. In this example, I want to illustrate that if you start with requirements, you can actually be much more flexible and cost efficient. This particular partner that we work with implemented a big data analytics solution. They provisioned their own document database because they wanted control over the cluster and how it was configured. And they provisioned high performance data disks. These data disks cost £1,500 per disk per month. And therefore their total costs to operate the cluster were coming in at about £4,000 per month. For this particular company, that cost was too high. And so we worked with that partner to go back to the drawing board and rethink the requirements. We reviewed with them the architecture, we reviewed with them how it was deployed, how they were managing the data, and we came to the conclusion that the database program that they were using actually wasn't required. So by going back to their requirements, they were able to land on a different architecture, which required a different infrastructure, and as a result, their costs came down to £150 per month. The moral of the story is, if you're led by what you have, you may well end up with a wrong or inefficient architecture. This partner realized that they didn't need to manage the operating system or the database programs, that there was a better solution in the cloud that was far cheaper and more reliable. The message is, when you start with infrastructure, you are limiting yourself. In a cloud-native world, you're less limited. But there is always a cost-value equation, and you always need to be comfortable that you are getting the value for what you are prepared to pay, even in the cloud. Now, I often get questions like, I am trying to do X. Is it possible to do this in the cloud? And 99.9% of times, the answer is yes. But the key question I like to ask back is, why do you want to do X? Or in some cases, why are you even doing this at all? Because simply transferring your architecture from on-premise to the cloud does not make for a better architecture. Bad architecture on-premise is still bad architecture in the cloud. Now, with cloud-native development, you have the ability to change quickly when required. Cloud enables you to move faster, react quicker to changes that come from your players or maybe some game design requirements. And in many cases, it allows you to deliver sooner. And you're less constrained on how you build things, but still efficient. I want to share with you just one final example about how cloud-native development can give you the flexibility to respond to changing requirements. In this particular example, a developer we work with wanted an analytics solution because they wanted to learn more about their players. This is a small team, 5-person development team, and they had no back-end knowledge within that team. And so they decided to implement a software as a service solution because it was easy to set up and deploy. What happened next was the game got really popular. The team grew and their requirements changed. What they now wanted was a more sophisticated solution, something that enabled machine learning, something that had high levels of customization, something that allowed them to experiment with A/B testing. And because they had a cloud-based solution, they were not locked in. They had the flexibility to adapt based on their changing needs. So as their business grew, their requirements changed, they were able to adjust their architecture without needing to change their infrastructure. And that is the flexibility that cloud can give you. There are so many aspects of the development cycle that can be revolutionized by the cloud. Whether you want to scale your player base, whether you want to improve your game reliability, whether you want to change the way that you do debugging, or how you manage daily updates or backend changes. Frankly, the breadth is just too much to cover here. But in closing, I want to leave you with one main message. That is, remember your development requirements will change along the way. You must be flexible and you mustn't be behest to old infrastructure that maybe has been inherited from years ago. A cloud-native approach gives you the flexibility to adapt to your changing requirements whenever you need. Now, to learn more about Azure, please go to the link on the slide. There are many resources there that you will find helpful as you think about your cloud development journey. I would like to give a quick shout out and thank you to Andreas Pohl, one of our cloud solution managers who are there to help you. And he helped me in building this presentation. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Rob Stothard, who is the technical director of acclaimed Xbox game studio Rare, who's going to talk to you about the ways the cloud is helping them grow in their next phase of development.
Thank you, Harvey. Hi, my name's Rob Stothard. I'm technical director for Rare. I'm a white male wearing a blue shirt and black trousers, and I'm referred to as he, him. I'm from Rare. We are, today I'm going to talk to you about about Rare, who we are. The Sea of Thieves A Pirate's Life release we did had an impact on the number of players that we have. It has a huge change in the player base. A quick conversation about the pandemic and some of the things that did to us, and then our thinking about our usage of Azure and where we're going in the future. So Rare are famous from their age-old developer, getting on for sort of 35 to 40 years now. Famous for kind of Jetpack on the 8-bit in the 8-bit ZX Spectrum kind of world. Then became a second party to Nintendo. Famous again for GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie on the N64 before being acquired by Microsoft in 2002, where they produced Viva Pinata and Cameo for the Xbox 360, amongst other titles. More recently, since 2018, we launched Sea of Thieves, and that was us joining the Games as a Service fraternity. So a little bit of background about Sea of Thieves. From an engineering perspective, we set out with the goal of bringing continuous delivery to game production. So what that meant was we were going to have a large-scale automation of build and test processes that would allow us to build the game iteratively. So we actually launched the game to the platform. We shipped to an internal audience of Rare staff, I think in sort of 2015, 2016. And then we just iteratively added to the game. We did 120 title updates prior to going live. And we've done almost 100 updates since launch. To give a reference point, at the point that we were launching, most games did 6 title updates for the duration. And because of that, we have a very sizable build and deploy pipeline that is currently on-prem, but we'll talk about that. In 2020, we started work on the Sea of Thieves A Pirate's Life that launched in June 2021. It was a collaboration with Disney, which meant that Sea of Thieves meets the Pirates of the Caribbean. It was a huge opportunity for us, the two biggest pirate IPs sailing together. It was going to be promoted by Disney and Xbox, and it was being advertised everywhere from the Jumbotron in Times Square, across Disney channels, across all of Xbox. Our goal with this update, as always, was to surprise and delight our players. So the intent to achieve that was to have a very short period from announce to release. That was going to be about 2 weeks. So we would announce it E3 2021, and we would launch a couple of weeks later. The goal of this, creating this kind of media moment. But to achieve that, we had to be Xbox's best kept secret. So development of Sea of Thieves, A Pirate's Life, was almost entirely in the dark. It was known to very few people outside of Rare. So just wanted to cover what a Sea of Thieves services install kind of looks like as it's deployed to Azure. This is an abridged version. We use Service Fabric to host about 40 services that cover everything from how seasons progress is tracked, how achievements are tracked and granted. The in-game commerce is another service. There's a lot of machinery in there, but ultimately it's inside these app nodes, which are VMs inside a Service Fabric scale set. And Service Fabric helps us control how many of those things are installed and where they are. We then also have these kind of bridge nodes. So we have an open socket connection between the game clients and our services. So we can have this pub sub model of we can push events down to and information down to the client without it needing to request it, which was an important goal. We use RabbitMQ in a cluster, so that's infrastructure as a service that we manage. There's a availability set on the back end that's reached via a load balancer, and then we have all kinds of flavors of storage from ordinary storage accounts. We use Cosmos DB and Redis. It's probably important to point out that our architecture is actually quite old. Sea of Thieves has been in development now for about 8 years, and as a result, some of these technologies have moved on. So Cosmos DB wasn't available when we launched. It's now the common data provider that we use now. So what did Pirates Life bring in terms of challenges? Well, it was going to be very difficult to predict what the response to Pirates Life was going to be. Our only real reference points for levels of engagement were the Marvel Star Wars tie-ups in Fortnite, where they'd seen huge numbers of players join, many multiples of their normal CCU. So we had potential for a very large influx of players. So it wasn't unreasonable for us to think of multiples of normal player load. We'd had some problems in December 2020, which had exposed limitations in our architecture as we'd launched seasons, and we were addressing those. But the biggest problem that we had very little time to make changes. So our go-to-market plan for Pirates Life that we put together in December 2020 was to go live in June, but it meant that we had to kind of finish any real engineering to support scale by April 2021. Risks at that point would have been extremely high. It was a closely guarded secret, so we had no time to test services under load. We couldn't use our normal insiders process to beta test because we would be revealing the secret. It just wasn't a thing we could do. We needed considerably higher capacity, as I've said before. But any changes that we make must be safe. We can't introduce risk. There's no opportunity to make wholesale architecture changes or change tech choices. Those things would have just introduced risk and made the process considerably more difficult. So going back to how our Sea of Thieves services architecture is deployed, the group of services can be split into two, and this is one of the first things that we did. So at the top there, we've got sort of our persistent resources. This is the storage accounts and the sort of infrastructure that addresses services. Those storage accounts contain the player's data, so we don't want to kind of mess with those. We'll keep those off to one side. But everything in the bottom of this slide, that's stateless services. They can be torn down and created at will, and it will make no difference to the player's progress. And because we use infrastructure as a service, that's what we can do. So we can recreate this entire environment from scratch as many times as we like. So we took this approach that actually what we're going to do is think of the game in terms of stamps. So rather than thinking about each individual service as a scale point, so going into a commerce service and making it more performant, or going to Rabbit and making it more performant, what we actually did was duplicate everything up and just deploy multiple versions of it. And what you have is each unit is capable of supporting a certain amount of players, and you know it will because we've seen that it will do so. And so by doing that and taking a copy of it and deploying it, the only thing that we really had to do was make sure that all the players on a server were connected to the same version of the same stamp of the environment. What this did was, so this took us about 4 weeks to change, and what we got from that was that our old infrastructure had become our scale unit. So as the player base was increasing, we would just, every time we got to a new level, we would just add another stamp in. We would just add another stamp in. We were comfortable that we could just keep going. It gave us a very linear, consistent deployment scaling strategy. It changed how we think about load and scale out, because now Now we just think about how performant is a stamp. We can look at each stamp, we can go inside it and tune it to the amount of players that we expect it to achieve, and know that we still have that ability to scale up. It's only possible because we use infrastructure as code. Sorry, I'll go through this again. Sorry. It took about 4 weeks to make a change. It's only possible because we use infrastructure as code and Azure ARM templates for our deployments. This update, the Pirates Live, was actually our smoothest yet. There was no issues at all on launch day with scale, even though we saw a huge increase in traffic. The other thing we now have is it gives us a real flexible infrastructure. So in some cases, if we think we can make a change to the infrastructure, we can try it out. We can create a stamp that's got a slight difference, maybe different size VMs or bigger VMs or smaller VMs or whatever the change is. And we can introduce it with the other stamps and see how it performs and use the telemetry to get an idea of what's going on. And that's only possible because of our infrastructure as code approach. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about something that happened during the pandemic. In March 2020, obviously the coronavirus pandemic, it closed the studio. Only essential staff were allowed on site. And by essential, that meant security and maintenance. So no engineering allowed on site, none of the IT team were allowed on site. It was literally just security and maintenance. We were currently working towards the Steam release, which would go out in June. So we were already in this period of preparing for that release. We were testing. It was quite a busy time. And because of the pandemic and people being locked down around the world, we actually saw quite a sudden rise in players. So we had this moment where lots of people were relying on games around the world to fill the space where real life had been. And we were in the process of figuring out how to work remotely. But then we nearly had to power down the on-site data center. So we had an aircon fault, an air conditioning fault inside the on-premises data center that led to it meant that the IT team were having to thermally manage what was actually running in the data center. We were sort of turning machines off. We were scaling down our on-farm build farm because we had to keep the temperature below a certain level. Air conditioning engineers were not considered essential workers, so we weren't going to be able to get one on site to come and fix it. I think it took a couple of weeks for it to happen. And that kind of made us think, what's the impact of shutting down the on-prem data center? Well, obviously we lose all build and deployment capabilities. We've lost all our automated testing. We've lost preview builds for the dev teams who are working on future releases. We've lost test builds for QA to approve to go out. We've lost the beta releases, so our insiders now can't help us understand the new features that we're putting out. And all of this would have been fine. Oh, sorry, and no production releases. So our Steam build would have been held back. All of this would have been fine. Given the current state of the pandemic, we would have easily moved our launch plans. However, no ability to react to a live incident is kind of critical. We could have had a security incident that means we're losing players' data, or we've exposed a threat to Azure or Xbox through our infrastructure. And that's something that we'd need to address immediately, and we have to be able to do that at all times. So even though we didn't lose the data center, we had to do something about it. So at this time, we were also working on Everwild, and Everwild, if you like, was born in the cloud. We'd worked in the studio. We'd built the Everwild build infrastructure completely within Azure. So we had a Team City build pipeline there that was making Everwild on a daily basis. It was based on ARM templates, which means that it's easily destroyed and created, and it's infrastructure as code. So, for example, that gives certain advantages, like for Team City upgrades. The on-prem system requires hours of shutting down servers and updating agents. In the cloud, we just turn it all off, destroy it, and bring it back again. So a couple of the problems with it, though, it was still in its infancy, so it didn't really have good test infrastructure, but it was good enough. But it did give us a template for our cloud-based build. So again, we'll have another quick look inside. This is it, an abridged version. There's not a huge amount to this. There's a Team City server. There's a SQL server to provide the support to it. There's storage for symbols and artifacts, and I can't read that last bit. And again, and then we have sort of scale sets that provide different build agents. Some that have got GPU, some that don't have GPU. But it took us about 2 weeks to prepare this in the cloud to be able to build Sea of Thieves. And whilst we didn't use it, it did become our kind of DR plan. It was our, if we did lose the data center, we now weren't in this situation that we couldn't fix the game if we needed to. So yeah, 2 good weeks to create, able to withstand complete loss of the site at that point from a game operation perspective. But what we're seeing is the beginning of cloud thinking applied to an on-site problem. So where are we today? We're fully moving off-prem now. So we've engaged a vendor, BGSS, who are working with us to move our on-site infrastructure to cloud before we then start to rethink how we build. They've been fantastic. They bring very specialized expertise to the problem, and they're able to reveal the things that we didn't know. We're starting to look at some of the things that we can do differently because we're in the cloud. So snapshots is a great example where ordinarily a build agent would synchronize from Perforce to get the source code together before doing any tasks that it had to do. What we're able to do now is actually synchronize a workspace into a drive and then snapshot that drive for any subsequent machines that want to work on that change list, and it's instantaneous. So we're saving huge amounts of time, and it's helping us to scale up and scale down the build farm. We're looking to have compute that closely matches the workloads. So we're at the on-prem, we only have one size of build agent that fits all, which is a great set of machines with GPUs and lots of CPU and lots of RAM in them. We're now much more closely going, okay, what does this job actually need? Because we've got this flexible infrastructure, we can start to do more of that and get a much more fine-tuned build process. We're starting to distribute compute-heavy workloads. So part of the work that was started on Athena is actually having Azure Batch do shader compiles rather than the build farm. What that means is you get this kind of massive distribution for doing the shader compiles that are then used by the build farm, and it dramatically reduces the time taken for that. We're looking into intelligent scaling of the build farm. So at the minute, we can look at it as being on a timed process where it takes about 15 minutes for a VM to be added to the farm, but we're aiming to pre-scale, and then ultimately we'll be looking at machine learning to make a decision based on the things that are queued or the time of day or the sorts of work that we've been doing, making a decision for how big the build farm should be. And we're also starting to establish cost per build. So now that the build farm isn't a fixed asset anymore, we can start to see it more as an operational cost of actually maintaining and building the game. In the future, we're starting to rethink our development processes. So starting to look at potentially using Azure Desktop instead of physical machines. So rather than having kit on people's desks and having to provide kit and get it where it needs to be, we're looking at that. We're offloading, we're augmenting developer workflows. So currently we've got workflows where when we have a server crash, we capture all of the crash dump information and logs and that kind of thing. Developers can go and get that to do debugging. We're looking at capturing that and having an automated process to actually create a machine that's got the source code, the crash dump, all of the tooling that was there for that change list ready for the engineer to come and do the diagnosis. And then slightly further in the future, we're looking at to smart testing. So that's using ML in ways like making a determination for which tests to run for a particular change list or group of change lists, tests that are most likely to catch problems or errors, rather than the whole gamut of tests that takes hours and consumes lots of build farm time. We could have an intelligent system that goes, actually, based on this author, these reviewers, this sort of file makeup, this is the set of tests that we should run. And then finally, securing our source. One of the problems we identified is that anybody that works on Sea of Thieves has access to the entire source tree. What we'd like to do is have it so that we can only expose areas of the source code, and the build farm is responsible and the only way to build the product. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight into us. Thank you for listening, and I'd love to introduce Nick Ferguson from ID Azure. Sorry, Nick.
Hi everyone, so my name's Nick Ferguson. I'm the director of ID Azure. I'm a middle-aged white male wearing a black and grey check shirt, and my pronouns are he, him. So welcome to this introduction to ID Azure. This is Microsoft's new program that offers independent game developers free tools resources, and support to quickly get started using gaming cloud services, regardless of the end platform you're targeting. Here are some of the games that are using Azure today. Some of the biggest and most ambitious games of the last few years have been powered by Azure to reach millions of players. But no matter how big the industry gets, it's important to remember that almost every game on this slide was built by a studio that started out as an independent developer. And that is why we are launching ID Azure. The goal of ID Azure is to empower independent developers. We want you to take advantage of the same services and capabilities used by those large teams building some of the most popular games today. We want you to be successful because we know that working with cloud opens up a lot of possibilities for the development of your game. ID Azure helps you develop faster and work smarter using the cloud while providing you with support along the way. So who am I? Well, I'm someone who loves the games industry, not just because of the incredible products we build and that I love playing, but because of the passion, talent, and enthusiasm that exists across the entire industry. I first got interested in game development as a kid, writing games in my bedroom for the ZX Spectrum, and then later at university on Sony's Net Euros. Here's a screenshot of the first game I ever made for the Net Euros back in 1998, which was reviewed a few years ago by the Bad Game Hall of Fame. I started my professional career as a games tester, which probably tells you something about my programming skills. And then I moved into design and production roles across various studios. Over the past 22 years, I've been lucky enough to work for independent developers, publisher-owned developers, and first-party development teams at Xbox. Most recently, I spent a few years working with the gaming teams at both Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud before returning to Microsoft to launch ID Azure. So what is ID Azure? Well, it's a new program from Microsoft that's been launched into closed beta to help independent game developers and creators use the cloud. Making games is hard. Everyone says it, but it's true. And our goal with ID Azure isn't to pretend that using the cloud is going to make game development easy, but we do believe it makes it less difficult. ID Azure has been built using the same developer-first philosophy as ID Xbox, Microsoft's program for self-publishing on the Xbox platform. It's available and open to anyone developing games. This isn't just a program for Xbox developers. It's open to all developers, regardless of your end platforms. And we're open for applications to our closed beta today, if you visit the URL below. So what we're going to cover today is why cloud? Why should you be interested? And what does it have to offer you as a developer? Second, what is ID Azure? What are the details of the program? And how does it help you start working with our cloud services? And finally, I'll share the details of how you can apply to join us. So why cloud? Well, here at Microsoft, our mission in gaming is to bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet. And the promise we're making to players is that you can play the games you want with the people you want, anywhere you want. In a world where players have access to more games on more platforms across more business models than ever before, we know that poses challenges for developers. And for people to play games on any device, developers need the right tools to build games that are playable on any device. Cloud is a crucial component of how we deliver that, whether it's the back-end components that power an increasing number of gaming experiences or the technology that gets your games into the hands of players. So when we ask ourselves why cloud, developers need to be thinking about two key benefits: flexibility and scalability. Flexibility means being able to quickly iterate in your game design based on the feedback you're seeing during development or early access. It means collaborating with talented developers wherever they may be located in the world. It means implementing functionality like cross-platform chat and translation that lets your players communicate wherever they're based. And it means enabling players to enjoy your game, regardless of their level of skill or ability, through a deep understanding of your player base through analytics. Scalability means global infrastructure that can deliver lower latency and a better online experience for players of your game. It's about taking advantage of the high availability of cloud and avoiding downtime. It's about using tools and services that can scale up and down based on your development needs and your game's success. The net result is that you can reduce costs, speed up development, and improve your player experience. So that's cloud covered, but why Azure? Well, here at Microsoft, we are both a cloud platform service provider and a game developer, which uniquely positions us to understand and address challenges facing game creators today. With 23 first-party studios, we are able to build, iterate, and test our games every day on our global platform, making Azure better in the process. With Azure, we promise to deliver you production-ready, proven gaming services backed by an enterprise-grade cloud. At Microsoft, we know gaming services because we know games, and we listen to game developers' needs every day to see where we can improve and help you launch on any platform. So what can Azure do for you? Well, when we talk about game services at ID Azure, we take a solutions-focused approach, which means that we're thinking about the challenges that developers face across various areas day to day. Solutions that might help include managing distributed development with remote team members, running multiplayer services for a cross-play, cross-platform game, analyzing game data to improve your difficulty balancing, or working out how to make your online community as inclusive as possible by using speech-to-text or automatic translation services. And ID Azure exists because all these solutions and all this technology doesn't matter if you can't take advantage of it to build and scale your game. So, introducing ID Azure. We understand that cloud can be challenging for independent developers, especially those who don't have large teams or team members with experience in managing infrastructure and running back-end services. A lot of developers are interested in cloud, but they're not sure where to begin or what is possible. The goal of ID Azure is to empower independent developers to take advantage of the same services and capabilities. And we think about helping developers across 3 pillars. The first is develop faster. And we do that by providing free access to Azure services so you can try them out for yourself at no cost. Next, work smarter. We've curated a collection of resources to help you get started developing with cloud, regardless of your previous level of experience. And finally, we want to provide support along the journey. We want to give you access to best-in-class support and access to cloud gaming experts who work with this technology every day. So let's dive into this and understand the specific benefits you get as members of ID at Azure. First, develop faster. Develop faster means we want to enable developers to start working with this technology at no cost so you can adopt it earlier in your development cycle. We're offering ID Azure program members up to $5,000 in Azure credits. All developers are eligible for an initial amount of $500, with the opportunity to access more in the future as we start working together and we learn more about the game you're looking to build. We're also offering developers the Playfab standard plan for up to 2 years. This typically costs $99 per month and includes $400 of monthly meters over Playfab's free to start pricing plan. In addition to the benefits of the standard plan, ID Azure members will also get access to extended service limits across various Playfab services. The service limits we're offering are extremely generous and have been benchmarked against some of the top titles that we have on Playfab. And the net result is we expect these Playfab services to be used for no charge for the vast majority of ID Azure members. When it comes to working smarter, we've curated helpful resources for developing with Azure from across Microsoft in the ID Azure education portal. This is a great resource for all developers, regardless of your skill level. For developers who are new to cloud, we have materials that explain what's possible and how to get started quickly, with a focus on managed services, so you don't have to worry about infrastructure. For developers that have more experience, we've got resources to show you how to extend those managed services, like Playfab, using native Azure services, and how to build new products natively on Azure. Finally, For developers who are very experienced and may already be working with other cloud providers, we have our Cloud Guru resources, which contain detailed information about our services, including lots of reference architectures and how to migrate your game to Azure. Our goal is to enable developers to quickly understand what is possible and provide you with the tools and information so you can self-serve and be successful quickly. The final component of the ID Azure program is support. We are committed to helping support you on your journey. We know that game developers are really good at figuring things out on their own, but we also know that browsing documentation and working things out by trial and error isn't always the best experience. So to help developers make progress quickly and avoid downtime, we're making it really easy to connect with the cloud experts at Microsoft who can help you. First, we're giving all ID Azure program members access to Microsoft's top-tier Azure support package, Azure Rapid Response. This comes with 24/7 access to our support engineers via email and phone, with response times measured in just a few hours for most issues and up to 15 minutes for a high-severity issue. In addition to ID Azure support, all ID Azure members get access to ticketed Playfab support as part of their standard plan package. These tickets go directly to the Playfab team, and you can expect a response within 1 day. We also want to help ID Azure members connect with the experts at Microsoft who spend all day working with games businesses to help them get things done in the cloud. To achieve this, we're running regular weekly office hour sessions where ID Azure members can connect with our team in a video call and ask them anything that's on their mind. And in addition to office hours, we're also hosting expert sessions where we'll be diving deeper into a product or service and getting members of that team to connect with the ID Azure program. This gives you an opportunity to learn about what we're developing, but also to feedback and tell us if it's going to meet your needs. So I want to share a couple of case studies with developers who are already working with us in our closed beta program. So the first is an Azure case study. So some developers think that if you're not running a multiplayer game, there isn't any reason to use cloud. But this case study shows that isn't true. Azure can't just help you with running your game, but with building it as well. Variable State is an award-winning independent game development studio based in the UK. They've developed groundbreaking narrative games like Virginia and Last Stop. For their new game, codenamed Game 3, they're using Azure to work more effectively as a distributed team. You can see here that they're running 2 virtual machines on Azure today, a Perforce server for version control and a continuous integration server using Jenkins. They found ID Azure to be incredibly helpful. They're also investigating using Playfab for analytics and live operations in the future. Our second case study focuses on Playfab. Thorium Entertainment are the developers of the critically acclaimed Undermine. Since joining the ID Azure closed beta, they've started using Playfab to store their player save data in the cloud. Beyond the convenience for players, this comes with a number of benefits for developers, including the ability to access these platform-agnostic save files, which can help with diagnosing issues and restoring player save files. They've also been able to implement cross-platform leaderboards very quickly, which has driven a big improvement in engagement over the previous PC-only version. In the future, Thorium plan to use Playfab LiveOps and analytics to improve their game balancing, change up items in their game dynamically, and gain insight into the popularity of their builds and enemy difficulty levels. So we'd love you to join us in our closed beta. So in terms of eligibility, anyone developing games is welcome to apply to ID at Azure. And I want to remind you that it's platform agnostic. So we're open to developers across all platforms, whether you're developing for mobile, Steam, Epic, Windows Store, VR, PlayStation, Nintendo, or even Xbox. ID at Azure is engine agnostic. So we're open to developers regardless of whether you're using Unreal, Unity, or your own custom game engine. And finally, ID at Azure is business model agnostic. We're open to developers regardless of your chosen business model, whether that's premium, free-to-play, subscription, or any other model that you care to mention. So how do you apply? Well, you can apply to ID at Azure by visiting our website at azure.com/ID. Click the Apply button and complete our short application form, which asks for some basic contact details, information about your studio and your project. Once we get that application, you should expect your response within 2 to 3 business days, and hopefully a lot less. Once you are accepted onto the ID Azure program, we'll give you access to our developer hub. This is a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about being a part of ID Azure. It contains onboarding details, tells you how to activate your ID Azure benefits. It contains the education portal that I mentioned earlier, and details of our office hours and expert sessions that are coming up. It also contains frequently asked questions and troubleshooting tips that we've seen with developers onboarding. One thing I should call out is that all ID Azure members must sign a mutual NDA with Microsoft. Our goal with ID Azure is to be able to share as much information about Microsoft's cloud services with our members as possible, which includes details of pre-release services or software that we're not ready to share publicly. Ensuring every member of ID Azure has signed Microsoft's standard mutual NDA enables us to do this effectively across the whole program. Our NDA is mutual, which means that protection of confidential information goes both ways, and anything you choose to share with us is also protected. This could be information about your game, including planned release dates or target platforms, or details about your workloads or architecture that you share in a discussion with our cloud experts. We just want you to understand that our NDA is in place to enable open communication and help make ID Azure a better program for our members. So this is just the beginning. We launched into an invitation-only closed beta in December, and now we're inviting people watching this presentation to join our closed beta, and we're expanding into general availability later this year. Right now, we're continuously listening to developers via one-to-one meetings, emails, survey feedback, and we're really interested to hear what's good, what's bad, what's missing, and what's unnecessary. Our goal is to build the best destination for any developer looking to get the best out of cloud technology. In the games industry, so much innovation is driven by independent developers. We can't see what you can wait to see what you can accomplish using these tools. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it will be awesome. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this talk interesting, and if you'd like to know more and apply to ID Azure, please visit idazure.com/ID. And next we'll be moving on to the panel discussion. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this panel as well. I'm hoping that the contributions are going to be as bright as the fantastic furniture they're currently sat upon. So my name is George Osborne. I'm the head of campaigns and communications over at Yuki, and my pronouns are he, him. Before we get started, I think it makes a lot of sense to make sure we introduce all of the panelists in full. So I'm going to start here, and we're going to work our way down the line. So shall we go ahead?
Hi there. My name is Yara. I'm the head of server engineering in Hutch Games. We develop mobile games, particularly in the racing genre. We've been developing games for about 10 years.
Fantastic.
Well, my name's Vincent. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm one of the founders of Payload Studios. We're a London-based indie developer. Our first game, TerraTech, has been on the market now for 7 years, and we're working on our future projects at the moment.
Fantastic. And a familiar face, but let's do an introduction just in case someone missed your talk earlier.
I'm Rob Soffard. I'm Technical Director of Services for Rare, a long-established studio based in the Midlands, and we're currently running and operating Sea of Thieves.
Fantastic. And, you know, as a first question, I'm certainly not as hardworking as some of the fantastic indie developers that we've just been talking about, so I'm going to actually just steal it from the title of the event, which is Cloud Native Games. Why should you care? So why should someone listening to this care? I'm going to open up with you, Rob, because I'd like to mix the order around.
Okay, so I think that you should care because it's being a cloud native game developer is really moving aside some of the things that would be difficult for you as a non-cloud native. So the example that Nick's just given around the studio that have set up their build pipeline and their source control in the cloud, they've making a decision not to fix on a machine that's in an office that they're going to look after, or it's going to get kicked over, or the power's going to get disconnected. Like they've made some good decisions,
Yeah.
and I think that's why you should care. It really puts you on a good setting to build your title.
Fantastic. So there are those long-term benefits there. And Yara as well, what's your thought on that opening questions about why businesses should care, especially coming from a slightly different perspective, working in mobile? Maybe there's a bit of an angle there.
Yeah, I think what's important in mobile gaming is to be able to prototype and iterate really fast. And with cloud gaming, cloud computing, we can do it. We can prototype twice, maybe more times faster than before. So it allows really great flexibility as well.
Fantastic. And Vincent, though, I'm approaching this with a slightly different angle with you, because you're actually in the boat that a lot of people who might be watching are, which is you're thinking about embarking on your journey with cloud. So what's making you think now's the time to look at this?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things that Nick mentioned are really interesting to us. We've got a fairly small team, and we're not rolling in money. Anything that helps to reduce our costs is going to be always very interesting. Anything I think that helps us to kind of get closer to our community. We're very much a community-driven developer, and any technology that really assists with that is going to be really, really exciting as well.
Fantastic. And I thought what was really interesting there is everyone approached that slightly differently. We managed to each find a different strength, which I think speaks to the versatility of it. But I think there was something actually I really wanted to go back to you on, Rob, as well.
Okay.
Something that you brought up from your talk, which was a little bit about making games and the way it's changed as a result of the pandemic. Because, you know, you were mentioning some of those initial challenges that you were facing as a studio when you were dealing with, as we all were, as we were all fleeing from our offices and going back home. Now, one of the things about cloud development is that it actually seems to give you that much greater flexibility to work where you need to, rather than having one specific location. What are your thoughts on that in terms of how the pandemic has shifted the argument's favour?
So as we're looking to the future, so we've obviously had a large on-prem infrastructure for Sea of Thieves that we're currently changing. And one of the things that we've realised through the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, we were starting to take on lots of vendors, and we were becoming a distributed workforce anyway because of that approach. We have about 6 studios that work with us to make Sea of Thieves. And so one of the things that we're looking at is actually starting to reevaluate where does the equipment need to be. Like if you're, I think we've looked about hybrid workspace. Like does the machinery that you need, can it be virtual? Can it be that you remote on to work on the title you're working on, rather than actually being sat at having machinery on your desk and all this kind of stuff? I think that's where we're going, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating point as well, because I know, you know, one of the things that's fantastic about our industry is there's talent also available around the world.
Yep.
And you know, one of the things that I've heard through my work at Yuki is companies go, well, actually, we want to be able to bring on talent wherever they're based. We want to be able to. I mean, has there been any experience of that in terms of what's going on, and any benefits in terms of having more of a cloud infrastructure for bringing that talent on board?
After we sent everybody home in March, people are still there. Our studio opened again just a couple of weeks ago, but people have actually dispersed around the country. We've got people who have moved home who only lived in Leicestershire because they were working for us, and they've gone home to be near family and friends before they've commuted. They're in no hurry to come back, and honestly, we're okay to let them, because we've now got the infrastructure in place. The other thing that's been interesting with the studios that we've worked with, as we came off site and all went into a slightly more remote environment, the feedback from them was it's been much easier to work with us because we don't have these little private conversations in the studio that they're excluded from. It's a much more inclusive environment, and it's much easier to bring people together when you're working remotely, when you've got that kind of distributed capability.
And that's a really fascinating point. And I think as well that point around greater inclusivity, about making sure that we can get more people involved. I think that's fascinating. That's absolutely fantastic to hear. But you also hinted at as well, because I know we had a little bit of chat earlier about this before. We do talk before we come on air. I'm sorry to admit that, but we did have a little bit of a chat about this idea about how cloud's going to fit into the future of work and around the industry. Because Vincent, you were saying, you know, you were thinking about the way that you're going to work and saying, realistically, you're probably not going to be in an office full time anymore. You're not going to be in that kind of set of circumstances. So how does that affect your calculation as someone who's thinking, I need to be building my architecture for the future? What kind of decisions does that help with?
Well, if you think back to February 2020, everyone had one PC. They all went to work and they used that same PC, and then they came home. March 2020, everyone's taking their PC, and we paid shipping costs for everyone to take their PC home. Now, people will be working from home and from the office. We're pretty sure about that. We don't know what the mix is going to be. We think the full-time working from home won't be the model, and we definitely think that the full-time working from the office will not be the model. It'll be something in between. We can't afford for people to ship their PCs back every day. That they're changing from working from home to working from the office. And as the guy who pays the bills, I'm not a massive fan of buying an entire duplicate set of infrastructure for home and for office. So anything that really makes it seamless for someone to work one day at home, another day at the office, a third day from another location, that is no longer a theoretical benefit or a minor benefit. That is going to be essential to the way we operate, I think, for the indefinite future.
Yeah, you need the way that you work when you're considering your architecture. It needs to be as flexible as your workforce is now, right? And if you're not able to get that at a good cost, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be harder to compete. So that seems to be something that's really big in favor in terms of the cloud. But Yara as well, what's been the perspective for Hutch around this as well? Because one of the other things in terms of this future of work and moving to flexibility, I also saw Hutch is trialing a 4-day working week as well, which I think is fascinating too. But so what's been the perspective there, and about where maybe having a bit more of a flexible infrastructure as a result of working in the cloud has helped out?
Yeah, so I can say that because we are using Azure cloud services, we are using Azure for most of our service stuff in backend. So we don't, as a result of that, we don't need to keep an internal tech team. Like, we can concentrate on developing games. So we have backend teams on each game, but we don't have like an infrastructure team because Azure does all of it for us. So that's been really helpful, and I think going forward, that's actually the most cost-efficient way of developing backends for games. Because initially it may sound like a more expensive option, but when you deduct the cost of the team to maintain those services, you end up paying less.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point as well about that idea of actually the leanness. You're getting to that point where you're going to be able to have a bit more of that flexibility to go and work. And because ultimately, actually, one of the big challenges that face the games industry is the fact that you can actually have these small lean teams suddenly being able to go out and build global hits, right? We are fortunate to work in a sector where if you go and create a great game, and if you start distributing it and it resonates with players, you can have an enormous hit on your hands, which is fantastic. But you need to work out how to manage that as a smallish team or a smallish business, perhaps. So, thinking again a little bit about that and going into that point, what are some of the opportunities around the cloud in terms of maximizing your opportunities when it comes to potentially scaling up or hitting a global scale? What kind of experiences have Hutch had in terms of bringing games out potentially to a massive audience when your team might be certainly not near the millions of players that I've heard you have?
Yeah, so definitely it really helps that we don't have to worry about manually provisioning additional VMs, because we are using Azure and Kubernetes clusters for and Azure scale sets to auto scale our services as required based on the load. And also we were able to provision. So at some point we had a surge of players from Brazil, and fairly quickly we were able to provision a new cluster in a different region. What also cloud allows us is to have zero downtime. So at some point we migrated from one cloud infrastructure to a different one, and because it's all cloud-based, we had actually no downtime affecting our players. And this will be really hard to achieve with the hardware infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely. And just if you don't mind me honing in on that point about Brazil as well, because you were saying that essentially cloud allowed you to just automatically deal with the problem. Like, what would have happened if you hadn't had a cloud infrastructure?
So it would affect the latency, those players from certain regions, because then they would be located farther away from the data centers.
Yeah. And and one of the things that I think is really key, especially when thinking about mobile games, is that a little bit of downtime there. Mobile games, you can have users churning in and out very, very easily and very, very quickly. So it's one of those things where cloud wasn't just improving the quality of the game experience for them during that potential downtime.
Yeah.
Also potentially being really important for how your business operates, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Well, fantastic. Because I mean, going back to the point about player searches as well, because I thought what was really interesting in your talk as well was discussing how you were going to manage the onslaught of Jack Sparrow fans as they came on board to Sea of Thieves as a result of your partnership. I mean, how much security and confidence did actually having sort of potentially the cloud being there to support you to deal with those kinds of challenges? How was that helpful for you?
So with the approach that we took, we were absolutely confident. We had a point as the daily users sort of started to climb. There was a point where we would know whether it was going to book or not, and as soon as it did, it was no thing. It's really hard to explain just how comforting it actually was.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things I think, especially a lot of developers, they worry about or they've read about have been those nightmare scenarios where your game has become too popular. There's been that concern that you've suddenly got such an onslaught of players coming in.
So we had that at our own game launch.
Yeah.
So we had our kind of forecasts for how popular the game would be and how that would turn into traffic, and we planned for that and ready for that. By going through our beta program, we were able to get some understanding of the game under the different levels of load and all this kind of thing. When it came to launch, we were also the first title the first party title that was day and date on Game Pass.
Yeah.
Which meant their entire player base was also able to play our game, and that meant that we actually went way past what we expected at launch. And we did get to the point where we stretched our services we reached our capacity. That's how we knew what the capacity was for the service infrastructure that we had. Over time, we didn't kind of get back to that point again. Coming forward to Jack Sparrow, where we've gone, okay, how can we rethink this and restructure it and change it? Whilst we didn't interrupt the players to do that. We made these changes. When the Jack Sparrow launch comes along, which is the next great opportunity to see the huge influx of players, we were totally confident it would be fine.
And that's such a shift as well in terms of how you must have been feeling. I can imagine. I can only imagine actually that sense of panic where you're wondering if the thing is going to hold together, right?
Yeah.
You can feel it coming apart at the seams. Whereas with this, cloud gave you the confidence to just sit there and go, well, not the total confidence. I'm sure you were still sort of looking at it.
Yeah,
really keeping an eye on it.
We were still, but there was definitely a point where it said, no, this is going to work. And it was much earlier in the day, and it was very, very good to see. To be fair, we were in cloud for our original launch, but our infrastructure had been built in such a way that we had these limitations, and we found them on launch day. We found them a lot. But then again, having that ability to really be able to restructure everything. Like if it had been hardware that we purchased and we were invested in, it would be very difficult to go to the business and say, actually, I want to go and buy a whole bunch of other hardware because that hardware that we have is wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas with the cloud, that's not how it is.
No, exactly. And I think that goes back to the point that Harvey made earlier, exactly on that issue. And the idea of you sort of suddenly frantically having to get a load of people plugging stuff in to try and keep up. A little less relaxing than the idea of relying upon the power of the cloud there. But I mean, and as well, so Vincent, I mean, thinking about your ambitions and thinking about that, I mean, how do you see the cloud potentially fitting in terms of that reaching of global scale with potentially your next project?
Well, one thing we learned from TerraTech was that you can have viral success out of the blue, and it can totally transform your business almost overnight, which has happened to us. And I can't think of anything worse than being lucky enough to get into that situation, but then not being able to take advantage of it because everything's just fallen over, because all of a sudden you've got 100 times more players than you did originally. I mean, that's just the worst thing possible, because you only get one shot at this kind of thing. I think you only get one chance, and if your virality falls down, because you can't accommodate new players, then they're not going to come back. We've seen, people are fairly fickle. They're really up for trying something new, but if it doesn't work then and there, that's it. They're not going to come back. And so, of all the horrible things that might happen to my business, that is one thing I just don't want to happen. I don't want to see that, because you've actually been there, you've got hold of the trophy, and you've dropped it. Which is just terrible.
Exactly.
So yes, anything that makes that less likely, I'm interested in.
It's definitely going to be something that you're reaching towards. And I think as well about that virality, and going back again to some of the strengths in terms of the cloud and what we were discussing earlier with Yara as well, it's the idea that actually it can work globally in the sense that it goes into each individual nation when an opportunity jumps up. Because we think about the big global viral hit games, but a lot of the time games might just go really big in one country at one particular moment because the content resonates, or a local creator picks it up and everyone decides to run with it. So the idea that it can quite easily and quite naturally flex for you, that must just be such a sort of a constant source of reassurance, right? And so that actually leads me into some specific questions about online multiplayer games. I'm sorry, Rob, I was immediately starting to look in your direction for some obvious reasons, because, I think the point was made earlier completely correctly that this infrastructure can work for any type of game, so we shouldn't rule it out. But there does seem to be some particular benefits in terms of what it can offer towards multiplayer developers. So, what are the kind of things that you think developers need to be thinking about implementing into their games when thinking about from the cloud perspective? What kind of benefits can they get if they're using the cloud within their multiplayer game?
So sorry, my mind's gone blank. From our perspective, I think if I can just talk to a second to the global demand thing whilst I think about this question. So with our Steam launch, for example, so we use Playfab multiplayer. We've been with that team since the beginning. With the Steam launch, we saw a huge change in the player base and the way the player base, the amount of people playing in different areas of the world. So PC players in Steam, there was a considerably greater audience coming from Asia. And so as part of that launch process, we were able to just add, in similar to your story, we were able to add Asia data centers in. I think having a provider where you can make those sorts of decisions and you've got that global reach is probably the important thing. So we did inspect a few providers at the beginning, and some of them were better. Since the road that we're on is a really good one, and it's worked out really well.
No, fantastic. And then going back as well to that multiplayer game point, some of the things, I was having a look through the documentation earlier ahead of this panel and seeing all of the things about implementing leaderboards, about chat. I thought translation, just the idea of being able to translate in-game chat for your players on the fly is just it's absolutely magnificent. So what kind of features have you taken advantage of in terms of the multiplayer side of things?
So we have that in Sea of Thieves. So if you're using accessibility subtitling, that's translated on the fly. That's part and parcel of the service provided. The Playfab provide our in-game chat. I'm trying to think of other services. We don't use the leaderboard service. We have our own sort of leaderboard services that we've built. I'm trying to think of other things that we use. We do use
No, because I think the important point about it as well is that a lot of this functionality actually helps you build nice, thriving, healthy communities, right?
Yes.
And I think, coming into it, it's like, we're talking about that enormous scale of games, and one of the benefits are you can have massive audiences for your games, but then these help bring people back together, right? And make sure that they get talking with one another. And so, when using this functionality, what kind of benefits does it have in terms of helping foster great communities that take the game further?
So our community was at the core of the Sea of Thieves kind of development process. So when we announced in 2015, we also launched our forums. And that's the point at which our community started, with kind of a few hundred or 1,000 people sort of joining. In fact, it should be more than that during the E3 presentation. And then over time, as we built the game iteratively, and we eventually got into this 18-month window where we were releasing to the public, and we started out with kind of a few hundred players that we would let in, and then a few thousand, and then tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands. As that was happening, this community was kind of building in itself, and when we actually came to launch, we had
this audience of people who were waiting to play our game on launch day. Some of them have gone so far as to become moderators of that community, who are now recognised in title as insiders and I'm sorry, we call them deckhands. They're our moderators on our forums, and they've got individual merch in the game that they can apply. So they've got deckhand sales and this kind of thing. In addition to that, we've got smaller communities that crop up. So we've got some people that arrange tall ships race or particular game events. And it's fascinating to see that sort of thing happen. You get that more and more. You'll sort of get this sort of groups of people who come together in a common interest, not necessarily to play your game in the way that you intended. Your game is just a platform to support their community.
That's it, and that platform, it's the cloud which is providing that platform. It's providing all of those things, and it's really important, seemingly, to understand that is a key element of you building your community.
I would say so. Yeah, when we've talked to people in the past about so the success of Sea of Thieves was quite a surprise. We sort of came out of almost nowhere, but a lot of that's attributed to the way that we started community first, and built that community as we went along with the title, and that's partially where some success has come from.
That's fascinating. And Yaro, what do you make about this in terms of the Hutch perspective as well? Because again, we talked about the scale there with mobile games. I think it's one of those things that people still forget that mobile is, in terms of player numbers, the biggest sector of them all in terms of the games industry. So how has Hutch benefited from this in terms of being able to serve your massive communities as well?
So we are able to respond much faster to our player base. So we have a fairly large Discord server for one of our games with, I think, over 200,000 players. And players are very vocal when something goes wrong. So because we have the cloud, all of our services on the cloud, we can over-provision the services. If something goes wrong, we can just spawn extra 5 or extra 10 VMs, and then the load or the issues, but they wouldn't be as apparent as if we were running on a lower spec. So for one of our game launches, we haven't optimized the servers, but because we were running on Azure Cloud, we were able to over-provision and basically have each VM serving only 20 to 30 matches at a time before we fixed it. But it didn't affect the players because we had that flexibility.
You were able to go and send in resource, right? Essentially, just be able to go, there you go, and deal with the problem, as opposed to have the players experience the challenge that they may have been experiencing without the support of cloud there, which I think is really, really fascinating. And I'm just going to sort of tie off this point and go over to Vincent as well to talk about TerraTech, because in many ways as well, it's got a burgeoning community as well already. So what are your thoughts in terms of thinking from your perspective as someone who's making that step towards the cloud? How do you feel it might be able to help you in the future in terms of supporting that community?
Well, it's interesting to link that back to multiplayer, because when we founded our business, we didn't have any money, and we really were not able to build our first game as a multiplayer first game. In fact, we did have multiplayer as a stretch goal on our Kickstarter for an extra £10,000, which thank God we never raised, because we would never have done multiplayer for £10,000. I think we were about 100 times off. Or maybe more than that. And part of the reason was the cost associated with a lot of the points that have been mentioned, the leaderboards, all of these kind of things that really, for a small developer, where do you even start? At least that was our problem back in 2013, 2014. So we really want our next game to be built with much more of a focus on the overall community. And people be able to play amongst themselves rather than just the link between us and the community, but more the links between the community itself, because we see that as being the thing that will really drive longevity, which is what we're really interested in.
Yeah, and I think there's two really fascinating points as well from that. Is this ongoing sort of democratization of development, making tools that previously might have been accessible only to the small number of very big companies now available to everyone. So, seeing what's going on with ID Azure is absolutely fascinating and interesting to me. And then I think the other thing as well is talking about using cloud within the making of the game, looking at it as both a tool for development, but also in terms of feedback and getting information in a way that you may not have been able to before. So, and one of the things that we were talking about earlier, Yaro, was a bit about how you were using it in the development process and using it within QA to go and test things, right? And to go and test ideas. So how did using the cloud infrastructure help you speed up your testing of your game concepts and prototypes at Hutch?
Yeah, so at Hutch, we develop racing games. In some of our games, we have thousands of cars and hundreds of different tracks that the cars can race on. And then we needed to estimate and assess car performance. So we could either do it manually by having QA person playing the game on a machine, but that wouldn't be viable. It would take thousands of hours. So what we did is we delegated this to the cloud, and we spawn every time we need to get car performance. We spawn like 200 to 500 VMs running a headless Unity client, which then runs the physics engine and gets us the performance. Then it's saved in the database, and we get all the data after a few hours instead of thousands of hours.
So you're realistically saying to me that as a result of working in the cloud, you were able to take months of what could have been months of work and distill it down into an afternoon?
Yeah, it wouldn't be viable doing it without the cloud.
Okay, no, because that's a really, really fascinating point, because I think thinking about how you can really quickly get that kind of data, it's especially important for mobile game developers I know, who are often looking to prototype and test ideas, get them out into the market, see if they're working. So that's a fascinating point. But I also kind of want to go back as well to something that you were talking about, Rob, which was talking about how you were able to involve more and more people within the testing process around CFEs, talking about the deckhands. So how did the cloud enable you to go and bring in that kind of testing process that allowed it to go out rippling through all those groups?
So as we were talking about there's another element of that I'll add to as well. So obviously we have our insiders products. We actually have two versions of the CFDs out there. So once you have CFDs, you can sign up to be an insider and go and play the insider product, which is the next version that we're going to launch. And it gives players an insight into where we're taking the title. Some of the things that we did during production, which I think speaks to what you're talking about, is as we were getting performance testing towards the end, before launch, we had separate environments for NVIDIA. And so NVIDIA were running our title, reviewing it and giving us performance feedback for their codes. And we also had separate environments for AMD and separate environments for other teams that were examining the title for very specific reasons. And the cloud allowed us to set up whole infrastructure just to support them, so we could segregate them away and we do that differently now. But the important point is that, again, because we've got this infrastructure as code approach, we can just copy it out, put it down, and open it up for them.
It's fantastic, and I think it's just that, again, we're sort of seeing those themes about extra flexibility, extra resource scalability. It's just fascinating to see all of that fits in. But one of the other things as well that I noticed was looking at the kind of feedback that you're able to get as a result of this. Partly it was about things like QA and development, but it was also about things like player lifetime value, user acquisition, looking at those kinds of data sets and being able to interact with them. And so, I'm going to go over to Vincent actually for this, about sort of a little bit of the context about why that's important. It's just like, why is it so important that games companies get access to that kind of information and data? Because it seems to make a pretty fundamental difference to the way they do business, right?
Yes, it's absolutely essential to the survival of the business. Our game, even though it's a premium game, has monetized as a service largely. In fact, we had our best year last year because we've continued to update it and add things as far as possible, following what the community was asking for. And without that, we would have just sold a decent amount of units in year one, and then it would have declined ever since. In fact, the sales arc has gone the other way because we continue to update the game. And we don't do that just based on what we want. We do that based on what the community is asking for. Not nearly as fast as they would want, I think, but we do base it on that. And we would not exist as a business if we hadn't been able to do that.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have raised enough money through sales to grow the business. So anything that simplifies and makes that more efficient, makes our communication with people more efficient, gives us more insight into what they're actually doing, is really valuable.
Of course. And, one of the key things here is that we're talking so much about this shift towards a service model, and I've spoken to people outside the games industry and said, it's the difference between selling a product and running a shop. And it's like, you can't run a shop unless you're getting all of that kind of information about how much people are spending, how much is coming through. So it's really important to get that right. It's great to see that, the cloud is playing a key role in enabling that as well. But we're actually coming towards the end of our time. I mean, it's been an absolute roller coaster so far, I must say. So I'm going to give you all just one opportunity just to think about a tip, a pointer, or maybe just a final thought about cloud games and about especially why developers should be thinking about going for that cloud approach. So Yara, to you first. I know it's a challengingly broad question, isn't it? I apologize.
I'll try my best. So I think, as I said before, so when assessing the cost of having a backend team or developing a backend for a game, I think a lot of companies that used to do AAA games in the past, they might think that the cloud would be actually more expensive for them. But actually, when considering the cost of the cloud service compared to having an internal team and the amount of issues you might be able to fix with having a cloud service, I think eventually it's worth spending that extra for a cloud.
Yeah, so a little extra investment can go a very long way, and that's one of the benefits.
Yes, it might be even cheaper in the long run.
Fantastic, excellent. Rob?
So I was going to echo Harvey's point, if I can remember what it was. The starting out thing, as you come to a project, being able to experiment with something and try something and not commit to it, and it being an operating cost of the product versus a capital expenditure, I think it changes your attitude to how you think about the process. So you can take a bigger risk than you would. Like maybe you do need a big server or a big service to try something, and then you get there and you go, actually no, we don't. You haven't bought it. You can just dispose of it and try something else. And I think I would have an eye towards that. I would dare to dream about the things that you could do rather than doing things the way you always have them.
Fantastic. And Vincent, final speedy thought from you.
Well, I was really interested to hear about the fact that you can have translation in real time, because for an early access game that's changing all the time, translating it into 18, 19 different languages is quite a challenge. And I had no idea that was an option. So my comment would be, look at all of the range of things that are possible, because there are far more things that are possible through the cloud than I thought of before I joined this event this afternoon, actually. The translations being just one example of many.
And so do you think you're going to go forwards as well on your cloud journey?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I hadn't appreciated quite how much we would be potentially doing that way. It's going to be more. So I think the first thing we're going to do is go back and have a look at the range of the non-obvious kind of services that can also be done, as well as the obvious ones. But yes, I don't think there's much alternative, to be honest, to doing it that way.
No, definitely so. And I've just really got to take a moment just to say thank you so much for all three of you just spending a bit of time talking with us now. I mean, I found it absolutely fascinating as well, and especially as someone who's on the other side, the person who's sitting there playing Sea of Thieves on Game Pass. It is fascinating to hear a little bit about how it actually works and how, especially the cloud's enabled all of that as well. And I'm very grateful for the many hours of fun your games have given me, especially during the height of that pandemic lockdown, where I think there was just something about throwing up in a bucket, throwing it over a friend that really got me through some of the worst bits of lockdown. But so thank you all very much. That's really, really appreciated. And thank you as well for Microsoft Azure for supporting this event. We're going to be seeing in a moment, I mean, it may already be up, a link where you can go to, where you're going to be able to get a hold of all of the resources that you're going to need to be able to continue your journey into the cloud and beyond with all of the things that Azure can offer through its games platform. And remember as well that the ID program, azure.com/ID, you can go and get involved in that as well now if you're looking to from an independent development background. But honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in this. Thank you so much for all of you for coming along. I've been George Osborne from UK, and thank you very much.